Would you eat a burger grown from human muscle cells? And what does this question uncover about neuroscience and our calculations of morality, and whether your children will have a different answer? And what does this have to do with endangered species, or the sacred versus the profane, or brain plasticity, or moral positioning, or social belonging, or stepping on the boundaries between moral categories, or flesh copyrights, or the future of personhood, or what your food choices say about you? Welcome to Inner Cosmos with me, David Eagleman. I'm a neuroscientist and an author at Stanford, and in these episodes, we sail deeply into our 3-pound universe to uncover some of the most surprising aspects of our lives. Today's episode is for sure the weirdest topic I've tackled, but I found myself chewing on a question that is hypothetical for now, but will not be in a decade. And I realized that asking the question serves as a great lever to open up several issues about neuroscience and our sense of morality. So let's begin with something familiar, a hamburger. Not the fast food kind of burger from a cow that you're used to. This one you're holding in your hand now was never part of an animal. This one never mooed or clucked or ran through a field. This burger started its life not on a farm, but in a lab. This is the world of lab-grown meat that has been trucking along for years. The way this works is you take a few little cells from an animal. In theory, you could take just one cell. This is a totally harmless, almost undetectable little biopsy. So you pop off a cell from an animal's muscle. You can also take it from the skin and reprogram that into a stem cell and then differentiate it into a muscle cell, but it's easier if you just start with a muscle cell. Then, what do you do with that little cell? You put together the right cocktail of nutrients and growth factors, and you stick it all in a little petri dish or a bigger bioreactor, and that single cell starts to divide and divide and divide until eventually you've got lots of cells. And what is that? It's a chunk of meat. That's all meat is, of course, just a hunk of muscle tissue made of lots and lots of little cells. Now, in practice, people typically co-culture some fat cells in there too to get the marbling of meat. And that's it. This is the stuff of burgers and sausages and nuggets. This is real meat, just without the animal who had to be raised and then killed. In this case, the animal is still walking around out there, totally unaware that it is a donor to the future of human food consumption. In theory, with the right setup, you'd never have to return to that animal again. You could just keep those cells dividing, growing batch after batch, a potentially infinite supply of burgers without killing a single animal. Now that's pretty revolutionary. Part of the benefit is the ethics, no more slaughterhouses, no more factory farms. And there's also the environment too. Livestock is what gives 15% of greenhouse gas emissions. A cow is basically a methane factory on 4 legs. And over a lifetime, a cow's water usage is astronomical. So growing meat in a lab could dramatically reduce our ecological footprint. Okay, so that all sounds great. But the wrinkle for now is that it's very expensive. The first lab-grown burger was grown in 2013, and it cost over $300,000. Now, prices have been dropping since then, but it's still not fast food cheap, and the energy requirements are huge. So for the foreseeable future, this remains a kind of boutique technology with a lot of promise for the future. But what I want to do today is think about the implications. Because once you're growing meat from cells, you're not restricted to cows or chickens or pigs. You can pop off a cell and grow meat from anything. What if you wanted a zebra burger? You could do that. What if you wanted a polar bear burger? Why not? What if you wanted a falcon burger? It might be gamey, but go for it. You could, without harming any animal, create a burger from the cells of a cheetah or a bald eagle or a panda bear. And that raises so many strange questions now that there's no ethical issues. For example, would you eat a burger made from an endangered animal, like an orangutan burger or certain types of rhinoceros? Again, no animal is harmed here. You're not poaching a tiger or hunting an elephant. You're cultivating a few cells. And you could do this ethically and sustainably and harmlessly. So is that okay? Is it less offensive if no animal is hurt? Does it change how we think about conservation or species sanctity? These are the opportunities that your grandchildren will have when they go into a restaurant. These will be their menu options. And then it gets even stranger because for the past few decades, we've been unlocking ancient DNA from mammoths, from Neanderthals, from creatures that haven't walked the earth in tens of thousands or millions of years. So, would you try a woolly mammoth meatball? How about a Jurassic barbecue like pterodactyl buffalo wings or a velociraptor steak? And then, because this line of reasoning has no natural endpoint, we reach the real question. Would you eat a human burger? Not carved from a human and not taken from anyone against their will, just a few cells, a few muscle cells and a few fat cells, grown in a dish, no pain, no death, no victim. The question is that or is that not cannibalism? If no one is harmed, no one dies, you're not desecrating a corpse, will the taboo still apply in the future? Now, we're going to ask ourselves some crazy questions to probe our sense of the morality and the weirdness here. And remember, while these questions seem insane to us, they're not going to for our near-term descendants. Okay, so the first question is, how would you feel about eating the burger if it's your own cells? Would you eat a self-burger? Would it be an act of curiosity, of narcissism, of culinary self-knowledge? Not just you are what you eat, but you eat who you are? Okay, would you feel better eating a self-burger or a stranger burger? Does it matter who the donor is? Would you feel different about eating a burger made from the cells of an Olympic athlete versus a person who is homeless? Keep in mind, these are just muscle cells. The cells don't hold the properties of the larger person, but does it feel different if the burger comes from someone society admires versus someone society shuns? How about a burger made from your favorite movie star versus a prisoner? Because biologically, it's the same. These are just hunks of marbled muscle fiber. There's no memory, there's no personality. These are just cells. I was recently bouncing this idea off my friend Kevin Kelly, and he was struck with an idea that lit him up. He imagined that in the not-so-distant future, married couples might celebrate their wedding not with a cake, but with a wee burger. This is a combination of both partners' cells, grown and grilled and ceremoniously eaten together. Now, there's something loving and something disturbing about that idea. There's something sacred and something grotesque. And that's the point. Lab-grown meat is going to force us to confront the boundaries of our ethics and our imagination. It invites us to question why we draw lines exactly where we do, and whether those lines are drawn in ink or in pencil. Okay, so let's slow down to examine our physical responses to these questions. When I asked you if you would eat a human burger, even if you were nodding along with the science, following the logic and understanding that nobody is harmed, something else likely happened in your body, a little tightening in your stomach, maybe a physical recoil or a facial expression you didn't mean to make. That all comes from the neural circuitry of disgust. Disgust is a neurological alarm bell. It's a deeply wired signal, usually for survival. When you're disgusted, we see activation of a brain region called the insula, specifically the anterior insular cortex. This is a region that integrates information from your body, like smells and tastes and gut sensations, and helps to generate the subjective feeling of revulsion. So if you're in a brain scanner, like fMRI, and you smell something rotten, or you see a gruesome injury, or sometimes if you even just watch someone else react in disgust, your insula lights up. But here's the thing, your insula also responds to moral violations. If you read a story about someone betraying their friend, or cheating on a test, or committing a cruel act, this same brain region is involved. Your body responds to moral pollution the same way it responds to physical contamination. And that gives us a clue that disgust is more than just an evolutionary tool for avoiding spoiled meat or dirty water. It becomes the basis for our morality. It's how we police the boundaries of what is acceptable, what is clean and unclean, what is sacred and what is profane. Or when it comes to the way that we have traditionally eaten animals, what has conscious feelings and experiences pain and what does not? And this brings us to the idea of purity. Disgust is most reactive, not when something is dangerous, but when something violates a perceived natural order. It doesn't have to make sense logically. It just has to feel wrong. That's why we shudder at the idea of incest, even when it's hypothetical. This is why we gag at the idea of drinking sterilized urine, even if it's scientifically safe. And why for many people, the idea of eating lab-grown animal meat trips that same internal alarm. My colleague Jonathan Haidt did research on this some years ago and found that, in some situations, we don't build our moral judgments from reason. We make snap decisions based on gut reactions, and then we backfill with logic afterward. It's like our brain has a courtroom, but the verdict is decided before the lawyers even speak. In other words, we feel first and we justify later. For example, in one study, Jonathan Haidt and his student Scott Murphy presented participants with harmless scenarios that were morally provocative, like a story about a brother and sister who choose to have consensual sex just once while on vacation, using birth control, telling no one, and never doing it again. There's no direct harm in the story, and yet most participants judged it to be deeply wrong. When asked why, they struggled to articulate clear reasons. They might mention genetic risk, which was controlled for by the birth control, or emotional damage, which the story ruled out. But these explanations were tacked on after the judgment had already been made. In other words, people feel something is wrong, but they can't explain why. In describing this, Haidt wrote, quote, "Judgments were based more on gut feelings than on reasoning, and participants more frequently laughed and directly stated that they had no reasons to support their judgments," end quote. Now, this is fascinating because that instinctive disgust, that gag reflex, is not always aligned with harm. Consider this. Some cultures have rituals of reverent cannibalism, eating the flesh of a loved one as an act of mourning and remembrance and love. Most other cultures find that horrifying. So which is it? Is it honoring or violating? Obviously, disgust is in some part shaped by your culture. In some countries, they eat dogs. I have a dog who I love, and that repulses me. Some places eat horses, some don't. Here in America, we love to eat cows, but in the majority of states in India, killing a cow is revolting and illegal. So some amount of our reactions are culturally poured into us. And once they're baked in, they're hard to shake. We don't just say, well, that food isn't for me. We say, that's gross. We react with our whole bodies. And this brings us back to the human burger. No one is harmed, no death, no trauma, just a few cells grown in a dish. And these are just mammalian cells with very little difference between this and a McDonald's burger. But psychologically, these are worlds apart. Because the human body in almost all cultures is not just meat, it's a sacred vessel. To consume it feels like a transgression. And this is what lab-grown meat forces us to confront, our narratives, and when they might or might not require an update. What is meat when it no longer comes from a death? What is identity when flesh can be copy-pasted? What is taboo when the source of the taboo is no longer present, like harm or suffering? When we think about the human burger, we find that we often end up like Jonathan Haidt's participants who laugh and shake their heads and can't articulate any reason why they thought something was disgusting or immoral. So, disgust is a powerful emotion, but it's not always a reliable guide. It was honed to help us survive in the ancient savannah, but not really to navigate bioengineered futures. As the world changes, how flexible are our brains? Will we continue to have moral decisions dictated by ancient alarms, or are we able to update the software running in our heads? I don't know the answer to this, but this is why I would love to freeze myself and come back in 100 years, because it will be fascinating to see how generations down the line, born into a new world, are going to see these issues and whether they're going to be issues at all. And maybe, just maybe, we're going to have to learn to distinguish between what is gross and what is wrong. So let's return to the central question. Would you eat human meat without harming a human being? Just a few skin cells coaxed into becoming muscle tissue in a sterile dish. Why does something feel wrong? Well, let's zoom in on a notion from psychology, the notion of the ontological boundary. This is the invisible line that our minds draw between categories of being, between what is alive and what is not, or what is human and what is animal, or what is a person and what is an object. We are constantly sorting the world into these sorts of categories. And when something crosses those boundaries, we get a visceral reaction. For example, a corpse looks like a person, but it isn't one anymore. Or a lab-grown human burger is made of human flesh, but no one was harmed in taking it. These things sit in a kind of category limbo. They don't fit neatly into the boxes that our minds rely on. And when something violates an ontological boundary, it tends to provoke a reaction like disgust or fascination or fear. That's why lab-grown human cells feel unsettling, because it blurs the line between food and person. Even if no harm is done, the categories we use to make sense of the world are being scrambled. Because whether we're aware of it or not, most of us carry the belief deep in our psyches that the human body is special. It's more than just carbon and calcium and protein, that there's something about the body that shouldn't be violated or copied or consumed or commodified. The body in all human cultures is more than a physical thing. It's a vessel of identity and memory and history and personhood, sometimes even divinity. So when we talk about lab-grown human burgers, we're not just proposing a new food, we're poking at a sacred object. I mean, just zoom in on the way that every human culture has rituals around the body. Look at how cultures bury their dead or handle the remains. Some cultures wash and dress the body with reverence, others burn it or freeze it or bury it or leave it for vultures. But what they all share is the sense that what we do with the body matters. It's more than just disposal. It's a final act of communication with the person or with the divine. That's what's being disrupted here. Lab-grown human meat scrambles the signal. It's not a body, it never lived, but it feels like a violation because we're so used to equating the flesh with the person. Now, there are ways of getting around this category violation. Take as an example Catholicism, where you have this ritual of communion that involves eating bread and wine that symbolically, or depending on your theology, literally becomes the body and blood of Jesus Christ. It's an act of sacred consumption, and no one flinches at it. Why? Because it's ritualized and abstracted and sanctified. But what about eating the muscle tissue of a stranger from a bioreactor? Suddenly, we're not so sure. The frame is gone. There's no ritual. There's no tradition. It's just raw novelty. It's not that the act is immoral. It's that it's unclassifiable. It steps all over this ontological boundary. It doesn't fit our mental boxes. So we find ourselves in this strange new territory where science gives us possibilities that culture hasn't caught up with. So we've been talking about how brains view bodies, but let's turn to the other half of this. How do brains view food? Because when you look across cultures, the thing that's clear is that food is deeply ingrained into our cultural identity. Food is how we say, I love you without using words. It's how we connect across generations. It's the childhood recipe that your grandmother never wrote down, but everyone remembers. It's the thing that your partner cooks when they know that you've had a hard day. It's birthdays, it's first dates, it's funerals. Food is how we mark time. But it's also how we define who we are and who we are not. From a cultural perspective, food gives one of the clearest examples of in-group versus out-group behavior. The human brain is intensely tribal. We're wired for group membership, for affiliation, for categorizing us and them. There have been lots of studies in my lab and others about the brain regions involved when we think about other people, especially when we assess whether they're in our group or not in our group, whether they are like us or not like us. Please check out episodes 16 and 20 for much more on that. Anyway, what someone eats is one of the first cues that we notice. Think about when someone tells you they are vegan or halal or paleo, or that they only eat locally sourced food. That's not just nutritional information, it's moral positioning. It's cultural identity. It's a worldview. Even among people with similar values, food becomes a way to fine-tune social belonging. Think of the complex sub-tribes just inside the category of ethical eaters. There's the raw food movement, the regenerative agriculture crowd, the zero-waste locavores, the flexitarians who only eat meat on weekends. Each group has different rules, different values, different aesthetics, and they can instantly recognize who is in and who is out. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio talks about how somatic markers, which are bodily feelings linked to past experiences, how these guide our decisions. Our preferences around food are often somatic. In other words, they're not just tied to reason, but to emotion and memory and identity. So when lab-grown meat enters the picture, it doesn't just disrupt the food system, it disrupts the identity system. Say that you're at a dinner party and everyone has their own plate. Someone's got tofu, someone else has grass-fed steak, someone's trying oat milk for the first time. And then you brought the lab-grown koala bear sliders. Now, what have you done? You've stepped outside the norm. You've broken the script. You haven't just introduced a new food, you've introduced a new category. Your koala bear slider isn't from the eucalyptus forest in Australia. It isn't from a factory. It isn't from tradition. It's from the future. It's synthetic. It happens to be ethical, but it's deeply weird. And that changes how people see you. Because we don't just eat for ourselves, we eat with an audience in mind. Even when no one's watching, your meal is part of your internal narrative. Your brain is constantly simulating how others will perceive you. This involves a process called mentalizing, which is about understanding yourself in terms of other people's mental states. This kind of mentalizing is what allows us to predict social reactions or to feel embarrassment or pride. It's why people carefully curate what they order on a first date. So now ask yourself, what are people mentally simulating when you bite into a zebra burger or a lab-grown nugget of Albert Einstein? It's not about the nutrients, it's about the narrative. And something else to note is that food is also ritualized. So birthdays mean cake, Thanksgiving means turkey, Sunday dinner might mean pasta. We have particular things we do, and we have particular things we don't do. You don't serve sushi at a funeral or scrambled eggs at a wedding. We eat in patterns because it gives us structure and because repetition gives us meaning. These food rituals are encoded in your brain's memory systems like the hippocampus, but also more deeply like in the basal ganglia, which governs habit formation. In other words, meals are engraved deeply in the system. They become part of how we structure time, how we mark transition, sometimes how we know where we are in the week or the year or the life cycle. So what happens when you introduce a food that has no ritual context? What happens when you show up with a wee burger to your wedding? Or serve a lab-grown Neanderthal brisket at your child's graduation? Presumably, there's confusion and uncertainty because food carries symbolic gravity, and new symbols take time to stabilize. Until they do, they're going to feel strange. That doesn't mean they won't catch on. It just means our neural maps for meaning haven't yet caught up. So here we are. Scientific progress is handing us a way to eat meat without death, a way to separate flesh from suffering, a way to pull burgers from a bioreactor instead of a body. And we've looked at disgust and culture and food, but now the societal questions begin. Because even if something is physically safe, and even if it's technically possible, who gets to decide if it's okay? Who decides what you're allowed to eat? What cells can be used? Whose body is off limits? What it means to own a piece of yourself? Because in this future world of lab-grown meat, we need to consider the implications through the lenses of law and power. So start with a basic question. If somebody swabs your cheek and grows a burger from it, do you own it? It's your DNA, your biological signature, but is it your property? Legally speaking, this isn't hypothetical. There have been many court cases where people's cells were taken without consent and used in research or commercial products. The most famous case is from Henrietta Lacks in 1951. She was a woman whose cancer cells were biopsied and then used without her knowledge. Those cells became the first immortal human cell line known as HeLa cells, and ever since they've been used in everything from polio vaccines to cancer research to biotech patents. Her family didn't learn about this until decades later, but she and they had never given permission. So if a company today takes one of your cells, just one, and turns it into 1,000 steaks, is that exploitation? Is it theft? Or is it fair game? Biologically, cells are cheap, but ethically, they are loaded. And when food enters the picture, the lines blur even more. So here's the scenario. Let's say a startup offers you a contract. You donate a cell, and in exchange, they create a line of you burgers. You get royalties, they get a product. Everyone wins. Now flip it. What if they didn't ask? What if someone scraped your DNA from a coffee cup and cultured it and released it as a new product? Let's say you found out that someone is marketing you steaks in your name. Would that feel like an honor or a violation? In many jurisdictions, once your cells leave your body, you no longer legally control them. They become discarded tissue. They are trash. They are not yours. But what if that trash becomes a $1 million food item? What if a celebrity's skin cells are pirated and sold as premium cuts? Now, this is not impossible. We already have the infrastructure. We already have the appetite for novelty. And we already live in an AI world where increasingly your identity can be commodified, your voice, your face, your data. So maybe the next frontier is your flesh. Of course, when things get murky, the law eventually steps in. It always does, just slower than the technology. So just think about the new legal landscape. Do we need flesh copyrights? Can you trademark your DNA? Will we need consent agreements before anyone can pick up your coffee cup? Will there be legal lists of people whose cells can never be grown, like saints or Nobel laureates or political leaders? And what about cultural boundaries? Would a lab-grown burger made from the cells of a historical figure be illegal? What about someone from an indigenous community? What if the cells came from a culture that considers the body untouchable after death? Pretty soon, if you squint your eyes and look into the future, you'll see this becomes not about burgers, but about cultural sovereignty, about biopolitics, about the strange new terrain where bodies and identities and technologies collide. There's even another factor that's going to be at play here, which is intent attribution. Our brains are hyper-tuned to detect intention. Even in abstract patterns like dots moving on a screen, we tend to assign agency and purpose and will. This means we don't just react to what someone does, we react to why we think they did it. So if someone eats a burger grown from Nelson Mandela's cells as a political statement, that gets one reaction. If they do it for shock value, that's a different one. If they do it reverently as part of a memorial, that's something else entirely. The mental model we construct around the act changes our judgment of the act itself. So really, the legality is just the surface, because underneath is our brain's endless attempt to infer motive and assign blame and detect disrespect. That's why this issue will become so much more than just a binary law. It's going to require individual analysis in each case. And this brings us to another question, which is who gets to eat whom? Because for all of human history, food has mapped onto power. The rich eat the rare. The poor eat the scraps. Colonial powers brought their own animals, their own foods, their own values, and they imposed them. So what happens in a future where meat is biologically democratized, where anyone can eat panda or pope or pangolin? Is that going to flatten social hierarchies? Or is it going to deepen them? Will food become a playground for the powerful, where celebrities sell edible versions of themselves, or billionaires hold exclusive rights to exotic cell lines? So will this technology actually liberate us and undo centuries of inequality, or will it export the same dynamics under new names with different packaging? And so we return to the original question, not what's possible, but what's permissible. In this new world, flesh is no longer finite, pain is no longer required, death is no longer the entry ticket to dinner, but the stakes are higher than ever, because now we're deciding something much bigger than dinner. We're deciding the future of personhood, of consent, and of meaning. And the laws we write today will shape the menus of tomorrow. So, let's put ourselves some decades in the future and imagine that this all becomes normal. The awkwardness has faded. The novelty's worn off. The headlines have moved on. Lab-grown meat is now just meat. Your grocery store sells everything from aardvark to zebra. You can order a heritage steak cultured from cells of extinct cattle, or a Dalai Lama burger, or you can order a mee loaf grown from your own cells and pan-seared. Your children's children, they don't find this strange. They've grown up in a world where meat doesn't come from ranches, but from labs. And maybe where meals are tailored to your genetic deficiencies and your kitchen knows your microbiome and your mood. And now, perhaps something unexpected happens. As suffering is removed from the equation, the meaning of eating comes back in, because now that you can eat without harm, you begin to choose with intent. You eat not just to consume, but to connect. And so in the future, you might find that people are not just eating for pleasure or nutrition, but they're eating to remember a loved one, to honor a hero of theirs, to merge with their bride or groom. Burgers in this future are more than fast food, but a medium of emotional exchange. So maybe in the end, the real question isn't, would you eat a human burger? The question is, what would you want that meal to mean? Because that future is coming fast. The bioreactors are humming, the boundaries are blurring, and we'll each have to decide, when every cell is quickly reproducible, when what was previously sacred can be commoditized, what is the table we're going to set for ourselves? If anyone is miraculously listening to this old archived podcast in 100 years from now, please let my descendants know if any of today's predictions panned out or not. And if so, I hope you'll raise a toast and celebrate at one of your weird futuristic barbecues. Go to eagleman.com/podcast for more information and to find further reading. Join the weekly discussions on my Substack, and check out and subscribe to Inner Cosmos on YouTube for videos of each episode and to leave comments. Until next time, I'm David Eagleman, and this is Inner Cosmos.